Last year, I wrote a paper on the stigmatization of people with HIV, and I was fortunate enough to get editor-in-chief of Thurston Howl Publications, Thurston Howl, for an interview to better understand the stigmatization from an accomplished activist and author who's HIV positive. So in light of HIV Awareness Month, I thought it would be a great idea to remake the paper, but in audio format. So here's the interview that was recorded on September 25th, 2019. Enjoy.
My name is Jonathan W. Thurston. People call me Johnny. People call me Thurston Howl. Both are my name. I am a PhD student in English over at Michigan State University. Again, I specialize in race and animals in the 16th century. I also run Thurston Howl Publications, a progressive, mostly fiction publishing house. We specialize in a lot of progressive fiction and horror. On the side, I also am an academic book reviewer, and I'm also a journalist for the state of Michigan. Later this fall, early this winter, I'm releasing a book called Blood Criminals, Living with HIV in 21st Century America. And I've been an HIV activist for, 4 years now, coming up on 5. And I'm 27 years old. Not sure if that matters or not, but there you have it. So, back in the year 2014, I started dating my second male partner ever. And he told me his status. He was negative. I was negative. And because I trusted him, as people do, we knew we could have unprotected sex because we were both what was called clean. And after we broke up almost a year later, I found out from the guy he was seeing now, a guy who he had been with before me, that my partner had been HIV positive for about 10 to 15 years and had lied to me. When I confronted him, I found out that yes, it was true, he had lied to me, and that he was scared that I would have left him if he had told me. So that January, I went and got tested. And so, on January 7th, 2015, I was diagnosed HIV positive. And it was a very frightful time for me. Well, at the time, I was pretty sick. You have what's called a CD4 count, which is basically the number of a certain type of white blood cell, a cell that fights infections. And you have a certain amount in your body at any given time. And at the time, like the average person has, I think it's 600 to 1,000 CD4 cells. I had about 250. So I had like less than half of the CD4 cells you're supposed to have. Once you get to 100 or less, that's called AIDS. So I wasn't doing super great health-wise. And I grew up in the South, in the rural South, where you're kind of told if you have if you have a STD of any kind, you're going to die. It means that you're magically this terrible person who deserved it, probably. It means you were a slut, and it means that you're morally or ethically unclean. And so just being assaulted with all this news at once, I was definitely experiencing a lot of suicidal ideation those first few months. It was a very, very rough time. Especially when people online on dating sites, even just on basic social media, are telling you that now you need to go kill yourself because you're a threat to the community. I experienced that in larger heteronormative communities. I experienced it in in the LGBT community, and I experienced it in the furry fandom. So it was a very, very tough time for me at first because I didn't really have a strong support system. There weren't a lot of people who were checking up on me regularly. And I couldn't go to my family with it. And my friends knew less than I did. So I was really kind of floundering on my own. And that was very, very rough for me at first. Well, I like to think things got a lot better. Part of the way I personally deal with things that are hard for me is to find a way that I can control it instead of it controlling me. And so the main way that I deal with HIV today is through activism and education and outreach. So earlier this year, I gave a TED Talk on the subject. I just finished a book on the subject, and that'll be out this year. And I'm constantly doing journalism on the subject as well. So for me, when I'm doing that kind of stuff, it makes me feel like I'm in power because I'm trying to fight against the stigmas that made me want to kill myself when I was first diagnosed. I'm actually making efforts against it. So that's kind of how it affects my life today, is me being an activist. Otherwise, HIV doesn't really affect me that much. It's a pill a day, so that's not that bad. I mean, people with diabetes have it worse than I do. On dating apps and hookup apps, I still get people telling me to kill myself, probably about once a week. But I've kind of just taken that as par for the course at this point. And other than that, that's about it. It doesn't affect my life in any other way, really. I'm not quite sure what you mean by number 5. You say speaking to the victims, but I would say that typically people living with HIV don't like to be called victims. It's usually an insensitive word a little bit because it assumes that that's who we are. We're not people anymore, we're victims. So we try to stay away from that kind of language, though. Absolutely. I know I have a story coming out in the upcoming Fang that really deals with bridging the gap between the old HIV narrative, being the HIV narrative of the 80s, to the HIV narrative today in the 2010s. And I'm super excited about that story coming out. As I said, I have this journalism book coming out in a few months called Blood Criminals, which I'm super, super excited about. Because it tells the stories of people with HIV today. And I'm super excited about that. Occasionally I do other furry stories that deal with it, but I'd say that's about it in terms of my writing. I always find this interesting because all the stats show that there's a high percentage of people who think they don't have it that actually do. And there's also a high percentage of people who know they engage in risky activities but refuse to get tested. Because if they get tested and see that they actually have HIV, then their lives change all of a sudden. Because now there's an obligation to disclose and all that stuff. So it's interesting to know that just there's not these categories of people who don't have it and people who do. There are people who... Because there's also the third category of people who think they're too good to have it, but they're actually not. And people who are too scared to get tested, but have it. So I think the categories are a lot more complex than those two questions make it seem. But to answer it anyway, to people who think they don't have it and have been tested and know they don't have it, I'd say the biggest thing are, of course, always get tested, all that fun stuff. And here's the main thing. Don't stigmatize people with HIV. Because believe it or not, anyone can get it, even in a committed relationship. Even straight people can get it. So first of all, I'd say do your research on what HIV is. The way medicine works right now is that, according to the Center for Disease Control, basically, I can't give you my HIV. You could, I'll put it to be vulgar, I could come in every one of your orifices. You could suck all the blood out of my body and swallow it, and you still wouldn't get HIV from me. And that's coming from a doctor, no less. The medicine I take kills the copies of the virus in my blood. You cannot get HIV from me because of my medicine. As long as I'm taking my medicine, you cannot get it. That's not a 0.001% chance. That's a flat zero. And that's, again, according to the Center for Disease Control. So you can't actually get it from me. It's called being undetectable. And I wish that people who didn't have HIV knew that. Because a lot of people who don't have it hear that I have HIV and they get concerned at every front. Some people say they don't want to be in the same room with me because they don't feel safe. Some say they don't want to try cooking from me because what if a hair of mine got in their food? Some people say they don't want to kiss me or hold my hand because they're scared they'll get it. And they don't realize that not even through sex could they get HIV from me. That's something I fight for, is for people to realize that people living with HIV often can't even spread it. Because the people who know about it are the ones who are probably on medicine. It's the people who think they're negative, who have been tested in over 3 months, who are the ones that are spreading it around. Those are the real people we got to watch out for, and not the people who know they have it. So I wish people knew that more. And regarding the people that already have it, if I could send them a message, it would be that they're still humans. They're still worthy of respect, of rights, of love, of sex, of orgasms, the whole 9 yards. They are not any less human than what American government law makes them think they are, or what people on dating apps tell them they are. So that would be my big message to those people, is just they're worth all of it. As far as charities, I'd suggest donating to. Right now, HIV activism is in a weird place because it's a lot of disconnected places. The Zero Project is one. That's SERO. That's one such project. There are a few federal groups like the CDC and the NIH that would be good, but I'm not sure that they need charity though. And there are a few other just very small AIDS activism groups. Lambda Legal could always use more donations because they kind of are the ones who protect people like me. But of course, I'd always recommend donating money to your local AIDS network. And for people who think they don't have one, I guarantee you do. Every area of the country is protected by one AIDS network. So it wouldn't be hard for you to find it even if you're in the rural South. Every area has a network that covers you. So that'd be my charity to go to, would be find your local AIDS network. Regarding plugs, I probably need to make a website at some point. My Twitter is very not safe for work, so I wouldn't recommend that. I'm probably going to be making a website sometime this year, but I can say that I'd recommend checking out the TED Talk I gave, as well as the Blood Criminals book link when that comes out. But I don't really have anything else at this moment for plugs. I mean, besides activism, a lot of it was tough. I've had a lot of people telling me that I shouldn't be allowed to live. People telling me I shouldn't be allowed to have sex. So a lot of my response to the question is just ignoring certain people, debating other people, and then engaging in a larger activism. And that's kind of all I've been able to do, really. I mean, very loosely. So the way you described that as a connection would be unjustified fear based on paranoia. I mean, yeah, there were fake scares created. Absolutely. There's what's called the bug chaser and gift giver and all that stuff, which are these mostly myths based around the idea that there are these what's called AIDS monsters running around trying to infect everyone. And then people that are actively trying to get it and spread it to others. And I think even Rolling Stones released an article in the early 2000s that was about this, but they've since really removed it because it was such bad journalism. And the reason is like, I've met people online that say, I wish you could pause me, or I wish I could have paused you. And it's weird because the more I talk to these people, the more I see it as a fantasy scenario. Because most of these people who are like, yes, I want to have sex with you because you have HIV, they say, well, I know you can't actually give it to me because you're on meds. So it's like they say these things, but it's role play to them. They don't actually think I'll give it to them because they're actually well read. And the same goes for quote unquote pausers. Most of these people who go around saying, oh, I want to infect you, they're actually on meds, so they know they can't infect you anyway. It's role play for them too. So a lot of that myth that the Rolling Stones tried to perpetuate in the early 2000s, those kinds of people existed, but the actuality wasn't even there, and it still isn't to this day. So it's interesting seeing how the HIV equivalent of the Red Scare was a complete role-play fantasy, and has been for a long time. So I guess that's kind of interesting. Because again, people think that there's this AIDS monster going around that's actively trying to infect people. And if I somehow am engaging in sex with other people, consensually even, then I'm trying to infect everyone. And that's not the case. It's just not even possible. And I think that's an answer to all your questions. And almost all of this is going to be covered in my book. Almost all of it. Thank you all so much for listening, and I really hope that my story helps people living with HIV or people who are learning about its stigma, and it is a cultural issue. Thank you.